The court heard everything. He lied to all of us. Truth destroyed him. Before this story begins, understand this. This is not a story about shouting or revenge taken in anger. This is the story of a woman who trusted her husband, her family, and even her closest friend, and how the truth found its way into a courtroom. What was revealed there changed everything. Stay with me, because sometimes the quietest endings leave the deepest scars. The house looked perfect from the outside. White curtains stirred gently behind the windows. The lawn was trimmed. The porch light glowed warmly as dusk settled in. Neighbors passed by and smiled, the way people do when they believe they're looking at a happy home. Inside that house lived Amara Cole. At least that's what the world believed. Amara stood at the kitchen sink, her hands resting on the cool porcelain, watching the last light of evening stretch across the floor. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Somewhere down the hall, the television murmured softly, left on by habit more than interest. She had learned, over the years, how to keep a house quiet without making it feel empty. Or maybe she had simply learned how to survive silence. Amara was 42 years old, a mother, a wife, a woman people described as strong, graceful, and lucky. And tonight, like so many nights before, she felt none of those things. She reached for a towel and dried her hands slowly, carefully, as if moving too fast might crack something inside her that was already dangerously thin. Her reflection in the darkened window caught her attention. Her face, framed by soft curls, pulled back into a loose tie. Her expression calm, almost distant. She looked composed. She always did. That was the first thing people noticed about Amara, her calm. The way she carried herself, the way her voice never rose, even when the room felt heavy. Friends used to tell her they admired that about her, that she had a gift for keeping everything together. They never asked what it cost her. Behind her, footsteps echoed down the hallway. She didn't turn around. She already knew who it was. David. Her husband's presence had become something she felt before she saw, like a shift in the air. He stopped just short of the kitchen entrance, his reflection appearing beside hers in the window. "You didn't answer my call earlier," he said, his voice neutral, practiced. Amara nodded slightly. "I was busy." It was true. She had been busy folding laundry, helping their youngest with homework, listening to her eldest talk about college applications with a careful optimism that made her chest ache. Busy holding a life together. David sighed, the sound heavy with irritation rather than concern. "You always say that." She turned then, meeting his eyes. He looked the same as he always did. Well-dressed, confident, composed. The kind of man people trusted easily. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make others feel at ease. The kind of man who knew exactly how to hide things. "I made dinner," Amara said. "It's in the oven." "Not hungry," he replied quickly. "I already ate." She didn't ask where. She didn't ask with whom. She had learned painfully that questions often led nowhere. Or worse, they led to answers she wasn't ready to face. David checked his phone, scrolling absently. "I'll be late again tomorrow," Court ran long today. Of course, she said softly. That word, court, had become a constant in their lives. David was a lawyer, respected, successful, admired. His career had shaped their world, dictating schedules, priorities, and sacrifices. Most of them hers. He glanced at her briefly, as if assessing whether she might object. When she didn't, he nodded, satisfied, and turned toward the hallway. As his footsteps faded, Amara felt the familiar tightness settle in her chest. This was how it always went. Statements, not conversations. Distance disguised as routine. She moved toward the dining table and sat down slowly, her hands folding in her lap. The chair across from her remained empty. It had been empty more often than not, even when David was physically present. She remembered a time, long ago, when silence between them had felt comfortable, shared. Something they stepped into together, rather than something that pressed down on her alone. That version of their marriage felt like it belonged to another lifetime. Amara closed her eyes briefly and let her thoughts drift back, not to the beginning of their love, but to the moment she realized something had changed. It hadn't been a single event. It never is. It was the missed calls, the sudden privacy around his phone, the way his apologies sounded rehearsed, almost detached. And then there were the looks, from her sister-in-law, from David's mother, the subtle shifts in tone when her name was mentioned, the quiet judgments delivered through politeness. At first, Amara told herself she was imagining it. She had always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. It was part of how she was raised, how her mother taught her to move through the world with dignity, to choose patience over confrontation, grace over anger. But patience, she was learning, could be mistaken for permission. The sound of laughter drifted in from the television room. David watching something light, something carefree. The contrast made her chest tighten. She stood and turned off the oven. The untouched meal now nothing more than a reminder of effort unacknowledged. She packed the food into containers methodically, labeling them, placing them in the refrigerator as if organization could somehow restore control. When she finished, she leaned against the counter and let herself breathe. This house held years of her life. Every corner carried a memory. Every room echoed with pieces of who she had been and who she had slowly learned to silence. She thought of her children, their laughter, their trust, the way they still saw her as steady, as safe. For them, she stayed composed. For them, she swallowed words and held her tears until the night was quiet enough to hear them fall. Amara walked toward the stairs, pausing halfway up. She could hear David on the phone now, his voice low, familiar, softened in a way it rarely was with her. She stopped breathing for a moment, listening. He laughed. Not the polite laugh he offered colleagues or neighbors. A real one, unguarded. Her hand tightened around the railing. That laugh didn't belong to her anymore. She continued up the stairs, each step heavier than the last. In their bedroom, she closed the door gently behind her and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was immaculate. Neutral tones, carefully chosen furniture. A space designed to look peaceful, harmonious. It felt like a hotel room lived in, but not lived together. Amara reached into the bedside drawer and pulled out a small notebook. She hadn't written in it for months, but tonight her fingers brushed its worn cover with familiarity. She opened it and flipped through pages filled with quiet thoughts. Observations. Questions she hadn't asked aloud. When did I become invisible in my own life? Is silence strength, or is it fear? She stared at the blank page and picked up a pen, hesitating before writing. I feel like I am standing on the edge of something, she wrote slowly. And I don't know if it's an ending or a beginning. The words settled heavily in her chest. Downstairs, David's laughter rose again, followed by the sound of the front door opening and closing. He was leaving again. Amara didn't move. She sat there, pen in hand, listening to the house settle around her. To the ticking clock, to the quiet hum of a life that looked complete from the outside. She didn't know yet that this calm, this unbearable stillness, was the last moment before the truth would begin to surface. She didn't know that secrets, once uncovered, have a way of changing everything. And she didn't yet realize that the woman the world thought she was only the beginning of who she was about to become. By the time the morning sun reached the living room windows, she was already awake. Not because she had slept well, but because sleep had refused to stay. She lay still on her side of the bed, eyes open, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house. The soft hum of the refrigerator down the hall. The faint sound of a car passing somewhere outside. The steady breathing of the man beside her. The man she had built her life around. The man whose presence now felt heavier than absence. For years, mornings had been her favorite time. She used to wake with purpose, with lists already forming in her mind. Lunches to pack, clothes to iron, small moments of laughter to catch before the day scattered them apart. She had believed that consistency meant safety, that routine meant loyalty. Now mornings felt like standing on thin glass. She moved carefully, slipping out of bed without waking him. Even that, the way she had learned to make herself smaller, felt like a quiet betrayal of who she once was. In the bathroom mirror, her reflection stared back with tired honesty. Her face still held strength, still carried dignity, but there was something new beneath her eyes, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. Not weakness, awareness. She turned on the shower and let the warm water run longer than usual, hoping it might wash away the weight pressing against her chest. It didn't, but it softened the edges enough for her to breathe. Downstairs, the house slowly came to life. The children moved through their morning routines with the same innocent urgency they always had. Shoes by the door, half-finished cereal bowls, a backpack forgotten, then remembered at the last second. They were unaware of the invisible lines now dividing the adults who loved them. And she loved them fiercely. That love was the anchor holding her steady. At the kitchen counter, she prepared breakfast with hands that moved automatically. Toast, fruit, warm tea, the things she had always done, the things she still did, because the world did not pause simply because her trust had begun to crack. When her husband finally entered the room, she did not look up right away. She didn't need to. She could feel him. The way his presence filled the space felt different now. Not because he had changed overnight, but because she had started seeing what had always been there. The pauses before he answered questions, the way his phone never left his side, the sudden meetings that stretched late into the evening. Small things, always small things. That was how it started. He spoke casually about the day ahead, about work pressures, about responsibilities that required patience and understanding. His voice carried familiarity, confidence, the tone of someone used to being believed. She responded when necessary, nodded when appropriate, played her role with quiet precision. But inside, something was shifting. She was no longer listening to be reassured. She was listening to remember. As the children left for school and the door closed behind them, silence settled between her and her husband. Not an uncomfortable silence, but a practiced one. A kind couples learn to live inside without naming it. He kissed her cheek before leaving, the same way he always had. And for the first time, she felt it. Not affection. Distance. The door closed, and she remained standing there longer than necessary, staring at the place where he had been. It was then that the memory returned, the moment she had tried to dismiss days ago. The late-night call he had taken outside. The unfamiliar name she had glimpsed on his phone screen before he turned it away. The way his explanation had arrived too quickly, too smoothly. At the time, she had chosen peace over doubt. Now, doubt had chosen her. She sat at the dining table with her tea growing cold, letting her thoughts unfold without rushing them away. She was not ready for confrontation, not yet. Emotion without clarity was dangerous. She knew that from years of watching others make choices they later regretted. If there was truth hiding beneath the surface of her marriage, she would not drag it out with anger. She would let it reveal itself. The day passed slowly. She went about her responsibilities, her work, her errands. From the outside, nothing had changed. She smiled politely at strangers. She answered messages. She lived, but internally, she was observing everything with new attention. When she returned home that afternoon, she noticed his car was already in the driveway, earlier than usual. Inside, he was on the phone again, voice lowered, posture turned slightly away. He ended the call the moment he noticed her, too quickly. He smiled, asked about her day, offered a reason for being home early that sounded reasonable enough. She accepted it, not because she believed it, but because she was learning patience. That evening, as the house settled and the children disappeared into homework and screens, she found herself alone in the bedroom, folding laundry. Simple tasks had always been grounding for her. Today, they felt like preparation. She folded shirts she had washed for him, clothes he wore into a world she no longer fully knew. And then she saw it. A receipt tucked into the pocket of his jacket. It wasn't dramatic. No obvious betrayal written across it. just a restaurantville, a place she had never been with him, a date and time he had told her he was working late. Her heart did not race. It slowed. That was the moment she understood something important. Betrayal does not always arrive with chaos. Sometimes it comes quietly, asking you to decide what kind of woman you will be next. She placed the receipt back exactly where she found it. She did not cry. She did not confront. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to feel something deeper than anger. Resolve. She would not rush this. She would not explode into accusations that could be twisted against her. She had children to protect, dignity to preserve, and a future that did not need to be sacrificed at the altar of shock. That night, she lay beside him again. He spoke about plans, about stress, about loyalty and family. She listened with a calm that surprised even her. Because now she knew, not everything, but enough. Enough to understand that truth, once disturbed, never settles back into silence. In the darkness, she placed a hand over her heart and reminded herself of who she had been before marriage taught her compromise. Before love asked her to overlook too much, she was not powerless. She was simply patient. And patience, she realized, was going to be her greatest strength. By the third week after the papers were filed, the silence between us had changed. It was no longer sharp or explosive. It had become something heavier, something watchful. Silence, I learned, could listen. I noticed it in the way Marcus stopped meeting my eyes, in how his voice softened when the children were nearby, as if he were rehearsing a role he hadn't yet perfected. He smiled more, laughed louder, and suddenly became generous with small favors, bringing home groceries I hadn't asked for, offering to pick the kids up from school, fixing a door hinge that had been broken for months. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have looked like effort. To me, it felt like preparation. Because guilt doesn't rush, it organizes itself. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I had learned something important over the years. People reveal the most when they believe they're safe. And Marcus believed he was. He thought I was broken, confused, too tired to fight back. That assumption became his first mistake. It was on a quiet Thursday afternoon when the first crack appeared. I was in the kitchen, sorting mail that had piled up on the counter. Most of it was ordinary. School notices, utility bills, flyers promising discounts we never used. Then I noticed an envelope that didn't belong with the rest. No logo, no return address, just Marcus's name, handwritten in neat, unfamiliar script. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I sat down. I let my breathing slow. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a lawnmower outside, the house holding its breath with me. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, a legal notice, not addressed to me, not shared, not explained. It referenced a financial account I had never seen. A joint business liability tied to a property I didn't recognize, registered under a limited partnership that wasn't listed on any document I had ever signed. My name wasn't on it, but my marriage was. I read the page 3 times, my mind rearranging the words, hoping they would soften into something harmless. They didn't. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back into the envelope. That night, I cooked dinner as usual. I served Marcus his plate. I helped the kids with homework. I smiled at the right moments, and I watched him. He was relaxed, almost cheerful. He talked about work, about an upcoming project, about how stressful everything had been lately. Once all this is over, he said casually, we'll both feel better. Both. As if he already knew how it would end. I asked no questions. I showed no reaction. Instead, after everyone went to bed, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and began doing something I hadn't done in years. I followed the details. I searched the partnership name, the address listed on the document, the financial registration number, and slowly a picture began to form. The property was a commercial space, small but valuable. It had changed ownership twice in the last 3 years. The current leaseholder was a consulting firm I had heard Marcus mention once or twice, always vaguely. What he had never mentioned was the name attached to it. A woman named Leela. Not a colleague, not a client. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. Marcus wasn't just hiding money. He was hiding a life, a shared investment, a shared risk, a shared future he had planned without me. I closed the laptop just before dawn, my eyes burning but my thoughts steady. The betrayal didn't explode inside me like it might have once. It settled, and something else settled with it. Resolve. A few days later, Marcus asked if we could talk like adults. We sat in the living room, the children outside playing in the yard. I want this to be peaceful, he said, leaning back, crossing his arms. For the kids. Me too, I replied. He nodded, encouraged. I don't want lawyers dragging this out, he continued. We can handle this privately. There it was, the fear hiding behind calm. I agree, I said softly. Dragging things out isn't healthy. His shoulders relaxed. That was when I understood how dangerous assumptions could be. Because while Marcus believed peace meant surrender, I understood something different. Peace meant clarity. That same week, I scheduled a consultation with a legal advisor. Not a dramatic one. Not the kind who promised revenge or victory. I wanted facts. And facts, I learned, are heavier than accusations. The advisor listened carefully as I laid everything out. Years of financial control, vague explanations, accounts I was never allowed to see. The new document I had found, she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she folded her hands and said something I will never forget. You don't need to accuse him of anything, she said. The truth is already doing that. She explained how hidden assets worked, how shared marital liability could exist, even without my signature. How courts treated financial concealment not as a mistake, but as intention. You're not behind, she said gently. You're just early. I left that office lighter than I had felt in years. Not because the situation had improved, but because I finally knew where I stood. At home, Marcus grew restless. He asked questions disguised as concern. "Are you sleeping okay? You seem distant. Are you sure you don't want to talk?" I answered calmly. "I'm just processing." Which was true. I was processing the realization that the man I had trusted had underestimated me for years, and that underestimation had become my advantage. The children sensed the tension, of course. Children always do. My oldest asked one night, "Are you and Dad mad at each other?" I knelt beside the bed and smoothed her hair. "Grown-ups sometimes go through changes," I said. "But none of this is because of you." She nodded, half understanding, half trusting. That trust grounded me, because whatever happened next, I would not let them learn the wrong lesson about strength. By the end of the month, Marcus received a formal request for full financial disclosure. He read it twice. Then he looked at me, confusion flickering across his face. "I thought we said no lawyers," he said. I met his eyes calmly. "I thought we said honesty." For the first time since this began, his expression changed completely. Not anger, fear. Because the silence he had relied on was no longer empty. It was informed. And this moment, was only the beginning. By the time the court date was officially scheduled, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room. Every sound seemed louder than it used to be. The click of the light switch, the hum of the refrigerator, the echo of footsteps in the hallway at night. Each noise carried weight, as if the walls themselves were listening, storing evidence of what had gone wrong. Amina noticed it first in the mornings. She would wake before sunrise, long before the children stirred, and sit at the edge of the bed, staring at the faint line of light creeping through the curtains. The world outside still believed in peace. Birds still sang. The sky still softened from black to gray. Inside the house, though, something had shifted permanently. Her husband, Daniel, had become careful in a way that felt unnatural. Not kind, not gentle, careful. He measured his words now, thought before he spoke, paused too long before answering even simple questions. It was the behavior of a man who knew that something was watching him, even if he didn't know what it was. And Amina watched. She watched the way he held his phone tighter than before, angling the screen away from her instinctively. She watched how he left rooms to take calls, how he suddenly volunteered to run errands alone, how he became overly polite in front of the children, as if good behavior might rewrite history. She said nothing. Silence, she had learned, made people reckless. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. Amina had gone to meet her lawyer, Ms. Carter, a woman whose voice carried calm authority and whose eyes missed nothing. The office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, and the walls were lined with framed certificates, quiet reminders that truth had allies. They sat across from each other, a folder open between them. "Your husband's financial disclosures don't match," Ms. Carter said evenly. Amina's hands tightened in her lap. "Which part?" she asked. Miss Carter slid a document forward. "Several payments, regular transfers, not small amounts. They don't align with household expenses, business costs, or anything declared." Amina stared at the page. The numbers were clean, Precise. Repeated. Too repeated. Could it be an investment? Amina asked quietly. Miss Carter shook her head. No corresponding account. No declared asset. And the timeline overlaps with the period you described. The emotional distance, the secrecy. Amina exhaled slowly. She had prepared herself for betrayal of the heart. She had not fully prepared for betrayal written in numbers. There's more, Miss Carter continued. Some of the transfers appear to go through an intermediary account, a name connected to a friend of yours. The runes seemed to tilt. A friend? Amina asked. Miss Carter met her gaze carefully. Yes, someone listed as a secondary contact on an older document. I'd like to verify the identity before we move forward. Amina already knew. Her mind didn't race. It didn't scream. It simply arrived. Lydia. That night, Amina stood at the kitchen sink long after the dishes were clean, her hands resting on the edge of the counter. The memory of Lydia's laughter surfaced uninvited. Late-night conversations, shared advice. Complaints about marriage, motherhood, exhaustion, trust. She felt something hollow open in her chest. Not sharp pain, but something deeper. A slow recognition that betrayal, when layered, didn't wound. It rearranged you. Daniel entered the kitchen quietly. You're still up, he said. Yes, Amina replied without turning. He hesitated, then leaned against the counter across from her. You've been distant. She almost laughed at that. Have I? She asked calmly. Yes, he said. You barely speak to me anymore. Amina turned then, finally meeting his eyes. I speak when there's something worth saying. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, not guilt, fear. Well, he said lightly, too lightly. We should talk more, for the children. For the children, she repeated. Yes, they feel tension. Amina nodded slowly. Children feel lies more than tension. Daniel stiffened. What does that mean? It means, she said, her voice steady, that pretending everything is fine doesn't make it so. He straightened, defensive now. Are you accusing me of something? Amina studied him. The man she had built a life with. The man who once held her hands during labor. Who once promised honesty, even when it hurt. No, she said softly. I'm listening. That unsettled him more than accusation ever could. The children noticed changes too, though they didn't understand them. Meals became quieter, conversations shorter, laughter rarer. Their daughter began asking if everyone was angry. Their son started staying longer in his room, headphones on, escaping into sound. Amina watched them closely. This was not about revenge alone. This was about protecting the future from being shaped by lies. When Lydia finally called, it was late. Her name lit up Amina's phone like a dare. Amina answered. Hey, Lydia said brightly. Too brightly. I've been meaning to check in. You've been quiet. I've been busy, Amina replied. With the case? Lydia asked, pretending casual curiosity. Yes. A pause. That must be stressful, Lydia said. It is, Amina agreed. Stress reveals patterns. Another pause, longer this time. "Amina," Lydia began, "I hope you don't think—" "I think," Amina interrupted gently, "that honesty has a sound, and silence has one too." The line went quiet. "Amina," Lydia whispered, "you're scaring me." "You should be afraid of the truth," she said calmly. "Not me." She ended the call. In the days that followed, small truths began surfacing, like debris after a flood. Emails, receipts, timestamps that didn't align with stories told, a shared hotel booking, legal paperwork listing Lydia as an emergency contact on an account Amina had never known existed. Daniel's story, once smooth, once confident, began to splinter. He contradicted himself without realizing it, forgot which version he'd told, grew irritated when asked simple questions, defensive over details that shouldn't matter. And Amina documented everything, quietly, methodically. Not with rage, with clarity. One evening, after the children were asleep, Daniel finally broke. "You're building a case against me," he said flatly. Amina sat on the couch, a book resting unread in her lap. "I'm responding to one," she replied. "I made mistakes," he said. "But you're turning this into something it doesn't need to be." She looked up then. "What did it need to be?" she asked. He opened his mouth, closed it. She stood, her presence calm but unyielding. "You don't get to decide the shape of consequences," she said. "You decided the shape of betrayal." "That's not fair," he snapped. "No," she agreed. "It's accurate." He stared at her, searching for the woman who once softened arguments, who once reached for compromise first. She was still there. She was just done carrying the weight alone. That night, Amina lay awake, listening to the steady breathing beside her. The same man, the same bed, a different reality. She felt sadness, yes, grief for the life she had believed in, for the future she had pictured. But beneath it all was something unexpected. Strength. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet and immovable. The truth was no longer something she feared uncovering. It was something she was ready to stand inside. And as the court date drew closer, the story Daniel thought he was controlling continued to fracture, piece by piece, under the steady pressure of facts. The courthouse felt colder than Lena expected, not because of the marble floors or the high ceilings, but because of what it represented. Finality, exposure, truth without softness. Lena sat on one of the wooden benches near the back hallway, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had learned long ago how to sit still when everything inside her felt loud. Her breathing was calm, measured. Anyone passing by would assume she was simply waiting for paperwork, or maybe a delayed hearing. No one could see the memories pressing against her ribs. Across the hallway, her husband, Marcus, stood with his lawyer. He laughed quietly at something said under his breath. His posture relaxed, confident. That familiar confidence had once made her feel safe. Now it felt foreign, almost insulting. He hadn't looked at her once. Not when they arrived, not when their names were called, Not even now. Lena told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't here for him to look at her. She was here because silence had grown too heavy to carry. She glanced down at her phone, though there were no new messages. Her sister had texted earlier that morning. "You're stronger than you think. Walk in with your head high." Lena exhaled slowly. Strength, she had learned, didn't always look like confidence. Sometimes it looked like simply showing up. The hearing wasn't supposed to be dramatic. This wasn't a criminal case. Just another legal step in a marriage that had quietly collapsed under years of small betrayals and one enormous truth still waiting in the dark. But Lena knew better. Truth had a way of surfacing when people believed it never would. As she waited, her thoughts drifted backward, back to the beginning of the unraveling. It hadn't started with shouting, or bruises, or slammed doors. It started with absence. Marcus coming home later than usual. His phone always face down, his laughter softer around her, louder elsewhere. At first, Lena blamed herself. She wondered if motherhood had made her invisible, if exhaustion had dimmed something essential inside her. She tried harder, smiled more, asked fewer questions. Silence, she thought, was how you keep peace. But silence had a cost. A door opened down the hall. A clerk called her name. "Ms. Carter." Lena stood. Her legs felt steady, even if her heart didn't. She followed the clerk into a smaller conference room where papers were already stacked neatly on the table. This wasn't the courtroom yet. Just preparation. Formalities. Still, the air felt heavy. As she sat, Lena noticed Marcus enter from the opposite side, his expression polite, distant. His lawyer nodded at her without warmth. Marcus finally met her eyes, just briefly, then looked away. Something tightened in her chest. Not sadness, recognition. This was a man who believed he had already won. The mediator spoke calmly, outlining the process. Custody schedules, financial disclosures, property division. Lena listened carefully. She had learned the importance of listening, not just to words, but to pauses, to what was not being said. Marcus's lawyer spoke confidently about assets, about accounts Lena had never seen, about numbers that didn't match what she knew of their shared life. Her gaze lifted slightly. That was new. She didn't interrupt, didn't react. She simply noted it. Silence, when used wisely, could be powerful. As the meeting progressed, Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Lena recognized it instantly. It was the same smile he wore whenever he believed he was in control. Control had been Marcus's favorite illusion. He controlled the finances. He controlled the narrative. He controlled what Lena knew and what she didn't. Or so he thought. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that Lena had stopped being passive months ago. Quiet didn't mean blind. Silence didn't mean ignorance. And patience didn't mean weakness. After the meeting ended, Lena stepped back into the hallway alone. Marcus and his lawyer lingered behind, their voices low but confident. She walked slowly toward the exit, each step deliberate. Outside, the sky was overcast. The air smelled like rain. Lena paused at the top of the courthouse steps, letting the breeze touch her face. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She thought of her children, of how carefully they watched everything, of how they learned strength, not from words, but from example. She hadn't told them everything. Not yet. They didn't need the details. What they needed was stability, honesty, and a mother who knew when to stand her ground. Lena opened her eyes again. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of accountability. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Lena sat alone at the kitchen table. A single lamp cast a soft glow over the papers spread before her. Financial statements, old emails, a timeline she had quietly assembled piece by piece. She hadn't gone looking for revenge. She had gone looking for clarity. And clarity had led her somewhere unexpected. Marcus hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been careful, strategic, manipulative, and he hadn't acted alone. Lena leaned back in her chair, memories resurfacing. Her friend, Nina, the woman who had once held her hand in the hospital after her youngest was born. The woman who had reassured her when Marcus started staying out late. "He's just stressed," Nina had said. "You know how work is." Lena had believed her. Trust, she now realized, was often misplaced, not because people were foolish, but because they wanted to believe in goodness. She stared at the email timestamp, glowing faintly on her laptop screen. There it was, the moment everything shifted, proof that silence had been mistaken for ignorance. Lena closed the laptop gently. Tomorrow wasn't court again. There were still steps to take, still pieces to align, still decisions to make about how much truth to reveal, and when. She walked down the hallway and paused outside her children's bedroom. She watched them sleep, their breathing slow and even, unaware of the adult world shifting around them. "I'm doing this right," she whispered, though no one answered. And for the first time in a long while, she believed it. There are moments in life when the truth doesn't arrive all at once. It comes quietly, in fragments, in papers that don't belong where they're found. For Amina, that moment came on an ordinary afternoon, one that didn't feel important at all. The house was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. The children were at school. The air outside was warm, the kind of warmth that usually brought comfort. But that day, it pressed against her skin like a warning. She hadn't planned to look through the drawer. She was only searching for a pen. That was all. The desk in the guest room had always belonged to Daniel. He called it his workspace, even though he rarely worked there anymore. It stayed locked most of the time. But that afternoon, the drawer slid open easily, too easily. Inside were folders, not the kind filled with old bills or warranties. These were neatly arranged, organized, labeled. Amina stood still, her fingers resting on the edge of the drawer, as if touching the contents might change what they were. She told herself not to look. She told herself to close it. but curiosity, no, instinct, kept her there. She pulled one folder out. Her name was on it, not written by hand, typed, clean, formal. Amina frowned as she opened it. The first page was a printed email, then another, then a financial statement, then a legal document she didn't immediately recognize. Her breath slowed. The room felt smaller. She read slowly, carefully, the way she had learned to read things that mattered. And as the words settled into meaning, something inside her shifted. These were not ordinary documents. They were records. Bank transfers she didn't recognize. A second account she had never known about. Expenses labeled vaguely. Consultation, services, retainer. Retainer. That word stopped her. She flipped the page. There it was. A legal firm's letterhead. Her heart began to beat louder. Not faster, but heavier, as if each beat carried weight. Daniel had consulted a lawyer. Not recently. Months ago. Before the arguments became loud. Before the distance between them became visible. Before she had even considered the word separation. Amina sank slowly into the chair. Her mind reached for explanations, reasonable ones, business matters, estate planning, something harmless. But deep down, she already knew. This wasn't preparation for the future. This was preparation against her. She continued reading, and then she saw the notes. Handwritten. Daniel's handwriting. Phrases circled in pen. Limit financial exposure. Primary custody leverage. Discredit narrative early. Her throat tightened. Primary custody. Discredit. These were not the words of a man trying to protect his family. These were the words of someone planning to win. She closed the folder slowly, as if moving too fast might make the reality shatter. The sound of the drawer closing echoed louder than it should have. Amina sat there for a long time. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She realized that the confusion she had been living in, the self-doubt, the constant questioning of her own memory had been manufactured. Daniel hadn't changed suddenly. He had shifted strategically. The late nights, the emotional distance, the subtle comments that made her feel unstable, the way he began documenting conversations, the way he suddenly cared deeply about appearing reasonable. This wasn't coincidence. It was planning. And suddenly, the betrayal took on a different shape. It wasn't just emotional. It was legal, calculated, intentional. That evening, when Daniel came home, Amina greeted him the same way she always did. She cooked dinner. She asked about his day. She listened. And as he spoke, she watched him, not with suspicion, but with clarity. This was not the man she had married. This was someone rehearsing a role. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, Amina sat on the edge of her bed and made a decision she had never imagined she would make. She would stop reacting, and she would start observing. The next morning, she called a number she had saved months ago but never used. A lawyer, a woman recommended quietly by a colleague, someone who specialized in family law. someone who understood strategy. The consultation was calm, professional, grounded. Amina didn't exaggerate. She didn't dramatize. She simply presented facts. When she finished, the lawyer leaned back slightly and exhaled. "This," she said gently, "is not uncommon, but it is serious." Amina nodded. She felt oddly steady. "What do I do?" she asked. "You document everything," the lawyer replied, "and you do not confront him yet." That advice went against every instinct Amina had. But she listened. Over the next few weeks, she learned how to move through her own life differently. She copied documents. She saved messages. She noted dates. She paid attention to patterns. And the more she observed, the clearer everything became. Daniel wasn't just preparing for separation. He was shaping a narrative. One where he was the calm, stable parent. One where Amina was emotional, unreliable. One where her reactions could be used against her. But there was one thing Daniel hadn't accounted for. Amina was not reckless, and she was not unaware. She had spent her life adapting, surviving, raising children while balancing responsibility. She understood patience, and now she understood timing. One afternoon, as she organized digital files on her laptop, Amina noticed something that made her pause: an email chain between Daniel and someone saved under a neutral name. But the language wasn't neutral. It was personal, intimate, familiar. Her fingers hovered above the trackpad. She opened it. The messages were careful, not explicit. But they didn't need to be. They spoke of shared frustration, of long conversations, of being misunderstood, of planning ahead. Amina felt something tighten in her chest, but it wasn't heartbreak. It was recognition. This wasn't just legal manipulation. This was emotional alignment, an affair built not on passion, but on strategy. And suddenly, another betrayal revealed itself, not louder, but deeper. This wasn't a momentary mistake. It was partnership against her. She closed the laptop and sat back. For the first time in months, Amina didn't feel confused. She felt informed. And information, she realized, was power. That night, as she lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to his breathing, she didn't turn away. She didn't cry silently into the pillow. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and thought about her children, about what strength actually looked like. Not loud confrontation, not revenge in anger, but preparation, protection, truth. She knew now that the battle ahead would not be emotional. It would be legal, and it would be quiet. Daniel slept peacefully. Amina did not. But she was no longer afraid of the morning, because she finally understood something essential. She wasn't losing control. She was regaining it. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a scent that reminded her of libraries and quiet authority. She stood just inside the entrance, hands clasped loosely in front of her, breathing slowly, carefully, like someone who had learned the hard way that rushing emotions only led to mistakes. This was not the day she had once imagined. Years ago, she had pictured a courtroom as a place of fear, a place where voices echoed too loudly, where judgment fell quickly, where women like her were asked to prove their pain as if it were a crime. Back then, the thought alone made her chest tighten. But today, something had shifted. She wasn't trembling, she wasn't angry, and she wasn't here to beg for understanding. She was here to tell the truth. The benches were already filling when she took her seat. A quiet murmur moved through the room. Lawyers exchanging whispers, clerks shuffling papers, strangers waiting for cases that had nothing to do with her. To them, this was just another morning. To her, it was the beginning of an ending. Across the room, her husband sat beside his attorney. He looked composed, almost bored. His posture was relaxed, one arm draped casually along the back of the chair, as if this were a minor inconvenience, rather than the unraveling of a carefully built lie. For a brief moment, she studied his face. The same face that once leaned toward hers in quiet kitchens. The same voice that had promised protection, loyalty, a future. The same hands that had signed documents she would later discover were forged, altered, or hidden entirely. She felt no rage now, just clarity. Her friend, the one who had once shared laughter over coffee, who had watched her children grow, who had listened patiently to her worries, was not in the courtroom yet. But her presence lingered like a shadow. A betrayal doesn't disappear simply because the betrayer isn't in the room. It stays. It waits. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. As proceedings began, her attorney spoke first. Measured, calm, precise. There was no drama in his voice, no exaggerated claims, just facts, presented carefully, like stepping stones across deep water. She listened as dates were mentioned, accounts referenced, property records noted, and with every detail a strange thing happened. The story she had once lived in fragments, late-night doubts, unexplained absences, money that vanished without explanation, was finally being told in full sentences, out loud, on record, in a room that could not ignore it. Her husband's lawyer responded with confidence. Denials, explanations, technicalities. He spoke of misunderstandings, of emotional exaggeration, of stress. She almost smiled. She remembered how often she had been told she was imagining things. How often she had apologized for asking questions. How many nights she had stayed quiet, convincing herself that silence was strength. Now, silence belonged to someone else. When her name was called, she stood slowly and walked to the front. Each step felt deliberate, grounded. She did not rush. She did not look down. She placed her hand on the stand and took the oath, her voice steady as she promised to tell the truth. And then she began. She spoke of years, not just events, but patterns. She spoke of trust slowly eroded, of finances controlled and concealed, of friendships that shifted in subtle ways until they no longer felt safe. She did not accuse. She described. She spoke of discovering documents she didn't recognize, Signatures that weren't hers, of messages deleted, phone calls taken outside, sudden changes explained away with practiced ease. She spoke of the moment she realized she had been living inside a story written by someone else. The courtroom was quiet as she spoke. No interruptions, no objections. And for the first time in a long while, she felt heard. Across the room, her husband's composure began to crack. Not dramatically, but noticeably. His foot tapped. His jaw tightened. He leaned toward his attorney more than once, whispering urgently. Still, he did not look at her. That told her everything. As she stepped down from the stand, her hands were warm, her breathing even. There was no collapse afterwards, no emotional unrevealing, just a deep, unfamiliar sense of relief. The truth was no longer trapped inside her. It had entered the light. And somewhere beyond the courtroom doors, consequences were beginning to form, quietly, steadily, like a storm gathering far out at sea. By the time winter arrived, the truth no longer felt distant. It lived in the walls of the house, in the quiet pauses between deaths, in the way silence stretched longer than it ever had before. She could feel it now. The story she had been living was slowly turning inside out. She had stopped asking questions, not because she didn't want answers, but because she already had too many. Every memory from the past began replaying itself differently, as though time had adjusted its lens and revealed details she once overlooked. Words that felt harmless back then now carried weight. Moments that once seemed insignificant now felt rehearsed. She understood something important during those weeks. Betrayal doesn't arrive loudly. It enters softly. It waits. And then one day, it stands in the middle of the room, undeniable. She had grown quieter, but not weaker. Her strength had shifted inward, controlled, measured, deliberate. She was no longer reacting to pain. She was preparing for clarity. Late at night, when the house finally slept, she allowed herself to think. Not emotionally, but logically. She replayed timelines. She noted inconsistencies. She remembered the sudden changes in behavior, the guarded phone calls, the sudden defensiveness, the way affection had turned mechanical. These weren't accidents. They were patterns. And patterns, once recognized, could no longer hide. She had trusted both of them. Her husband and the person she once called a friend, in different ways, but with the same openness. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. Trust given freely becomes the sharpest wound when broken. What surprised her most was not the pain, it was the calm. She expected rage. She expected collapse. Instead, she felt a quiet resolve taking shape, a realization that whatever had been done behind her back did not define who she was. It defined who they were. That difference mattered. During the day, she carried on as expected. Responsibilities were met. Conversations remained polite. No accusations were made. She had learned that truth reveals itself more completely when it believes it is still hidden. And they believed they were safe. She noticed how confidence had crept into their behavior. Subtle, careless confidence. Lies require effort, but once someone believes they've succeeded, they grow sloppy. She listened carefully, she watched closely, and she remembered everything. Each detail became a thread, and she quietly wove them together. She sought guidance, not from anger, but from wisdom. Legal clarity came not as an act of revenge, but as an act of self-preservation. She wasn't preparing to destroy anyone. She was preparing to stand firm when the truth stepped into the light. And that distinction gave her peace. There were moments when doubt tried to return, when her heart whispered that maybe she was wrong, that maybe this pain was exaggerated. But doubt fades when facts remain consistent, and the facts remained. The hardest part was maintaining composure around her children. She shielded them from the tension as best she could. Their laughter still mattered. Their safety still came first. She refused to let betrayal steal more than it already had. Whatever happened next would be handled with dignity, for their sake as much as her own. At times, she looked at her husband and wondered if he felt it, the approaching weight of consequence. If somewhere deep inside, regret had begun to form. But she didn't search his face for answers anymore. She had learned that regret, when it comes too late, changes nothing. What mattered now was truth. Her former friend still played her role convincingly, supportive on the surface, distant underneath. But there was tension there too, an unease that surfaced when conversations drifted too close to reality. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Guilt always reveals itself eventually, and she noticed. She began organizing documents quietly. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just preparation. Knowledge had become her anchor. Every paper, every date, every confirmation strengthened her position, emotionally and practically. This wasn't about revenge fueled by anger. It was about closure built on truth. As the days passed, she felt herself changing, not hardening, but sharpening. Pain had refined her. Betrayal had taught her where her boundaries truly lived. She no longer feared the outcome, because she understood something deeply now. No matter what happened next, she would walk away intact. The life she once tried to protect at all costs was already gone. What remained was an opportunity to rebuild, not immediately, not easily, but honestly. An honesty she knew was unstoppable. On one quiet evening, as she stood near the window, watching the last light disappear from the sky, she felt it clearly for the first time, the beginning of the end. Not an ending of destruction, but an ending of illusion. And with that ending came something she hadn't expected, yet deeply deserved: freedom. A courtroom did not feel dramatic the way movies often pretend it is. There was no thunder in the background, no sudden gasp that froze time. Instead, there was a quiet heaviness, the kind that settles into your chest and refuses to leave. She sat straight on the wooden bench, hands folded, breathing slow and steady. Years ago, this woman would have been shaking. Today, she was still. Across the room, her husband avoided her eyes. He stared at the table as if the grain of the wood might save him from what was coming. The judge entered. The room rose, then settled again. And just like that, the story they had carefully constructed for years began to collapse. Her attorney spoke calmly, methodically, without anger. Evidence was not thrown like weapons. It was placed gently, one piece at a time, exactly where it belonged. Financial records appeared first, accounts that had never been disclosed. Money quietly moved during the years when she was told they were barely getting by. Then messages. Not emotional love letters. Not dramatic confessions. But coordination, planning, conversations that revealed an affair designed not just around desire, but around control. The woman he had trusted as a family friend. Someone who had sat at her table. Someone who had held her children and smiled at them. Hey, together they had shaped a narrative. They painted her as unstable, irresponsible, difficult. They documented moments out of context. They waited patiently for cracks, then widened them. The judge listened. The silence between statements grew heavier. When her husband's lawyer attempted to redirect, the answers came apart too easily. Dates didn't align. Explanations contradicted themselves. And then came the moment no one expected. A simple question. Why were these documents altered after the separation? Her husband hesitated. That hesitation lasted less than a second, but it was enough. The courtroom did not react loudly. No gasps, no whispers, just a shift, a subtle understanding that something irreversible had occurred. She did not smile. She did not look at him. She simply inhaled, slowly, and let the truth finish speaking for itself. The ruling did not feel like victory. It felt like release. Outside the courthouse, the air was brighter than she remembered. The sky wide, unconcerned with human mistakes. Her children stood beside her, quiet but present. Old enough to sense change, young enough to still believe in safety. She knelt in front of them, meeting their eyes. "We're okay," she said softly. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't reassurance, it was truth. Her husband exited later, alone. The friend did not appear at all. In the weeks that followed, life did not suddenly become easy. Healing is not cinematic. Strength does not arrive with music. But something essential had shifted. She no longer explained herself. She no longer defended her sanity. She no longer wondered if she had imagined the years of quiet harm. The truth had spoken, and it had stayed spoken. Her husband tried to reach out, once, at first, then again. Messages that started formal, then softened, then unraveled. "I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't think it would hurt you like this. I don't recognize myself anymore." She read them without anger. Regret, she realized, is not the same as accountability. Pain does not undo harm. She never replied. Instead, she focused on rebuilding something quieter and stronger. Mornings that were not rushed, evenings that did not feel heavy. Her children laughed more freely now. Their questions came without fear. Their home felt lighter, even in its simplicity. Sometimes, Late at night, she thought about the woman she used to be. The one who apologized for asking questions. The one who believed love required endurance. She wished she could reach back through time and speak to her. Not with warning, bruh, but with permission. You're allowed to leave, she would say. You're allowed to survive without becoming bitter. You're allowed to walk away without revenge. And somewhere else, in a quieter, lonelier space, her husband sat with the life he had dismantled. The children he saw less often, the trust that did not return, the realization that control is not love and silence is not peace. Regret followed him not loudly, but faithfully. It arrived each morning. It stayed each night. She did not need to witness his suffering for her healing to be real. That was the final truth. Strength is not proven by what you destroy. It is proven by what you refuse to become. And as she closed the door on that chapter of her life, she carried nothing with her except clarity, dignity, and the quiet certainty that she had survived without losing herself. Some betrayals don't end in revenge. They end in truth. She didn't win by destroying him. She won by walking away whole. And if you believe quiet strength is the most powerful kind, subscribe to Heartlight Saga. More stories are waiting, and
Thank you for spending this time with us. I truly hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, ideas, or suggestions for future stories, feel free to share them in the comments below. Your thoughts mean a lot to us. If this journey warmed your heart, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who loves stories like these. And to continue exploring new tales and adventures, subscribe to Heartlight Saga. Until next time, may your days be filled with light and wonder.